Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Monday, which doesn't mean a damn thing, but you're gonna get a how to base anyway, and today I'm gonna show you how to make this sound. Yeah. So this is 14 patchers in a patcher. You might be saying, Seamless, I only see 6 patchers. Well, these patchers contain 2 patchers, which each individual patcher contains an actual, voice of a thing. So the whole point, vision I'm going after here is basically post unison, where in regular life, you have unison on individual synth voices, and then you just do stuff to it, and then you distort it, and that is neat. And then you might think to yourself, well, I want to do that again. I want to have more unison. Well, you can clone a thing before the distortion, and then you get your unison into the distortion, but then that gets you what makes this original sound work at all, which is that you get the phase relationships cacophoning against each other, which isn't a word, but it is now, against the distortion, and that gets you the movement of the recent at all. And then also with the filters and whatnot. But if I want to have more of that, just to keep doing it again and again, the way that you do this is that you just render out the audio, and then you do it again, and you have multiple copies of the audio, and then you split the pitches against that, and then that's how you do your post breeze. Well, because we live in the future and we have ridiculous processing power, we could just do this live. And I wanted to see if there was maybe perhaps I could get some cooler results, and really, of course you can, because we're making much more minute differences in between different voices than just changing pitch. So we get interesting more interplay. But that's the basic idea here. So then this one here gets cloned twice, and that's 2 voices now with slightly different pitches on this guy here on both sides. So I just changed the pitch a little bit on that one to get it to do a little bit of racing. And then that's this guy, and then I did the same thing with this one. I just cloned it again, made the changes, made some more stuff, cloned this whole thing again, and then did it over here and might change more stuff. And then that gets us the whole thing added together. This is a high pass, and then this is the sub coming in. This is just a copy of one of these coming in all the way in here. We'll talk about that because it's a little bit cool. And then that's what makes the whole sound happen. So let's talk about what these original things even sound like. I gotta do this twice because there's so many patchers. So this is numero uno. Here's side A. Here's side B. Wow, that sounds really weird considering the contribution it gives to the whole thing. But basic idea is it's just regular old using some unison, and given that this is Harmor, we're going to mess around with the harmonic unison pitch window. Harmonic unison pitch window. If you don't know what this is, what's happening here is that in regular unison, you put 2 things together and you change the pitch of 1 or 2 of them, 2 or more of them, have to make however many voices you want, and that creates phase cancellation, which makes it sound awesome. In this one, we took it this whole chain is a step farther. We're involving a filter in this, but that's what you do with Reese's. You filter them. This cool window lets us do that pitch difference, but it lets us be different per harmonic. So every one of these little harmonics has a different unison value on it, which is to say that this one is a bit of it. This one's voice, 2 voices are a little bit different in pitch, but this ones are not the same different in pitch like it would be if you just smash together 2 saw waves that were just originally saw waves. These guys are saw waves, but they're created out of individual sine waves, and those individual sine waves have a unison value that can be changed individually. And this is where you do that. That creates a whole special ridiculous phase cancellation profile, but we still want the regular unison thing coming out of it altogether. I put a phaser on here, and it's on harmonic mode, which means that the phaser's overall shape will be influenced by the pitch changes to harmonics, and that usually means the unison values here, but it barely does anything. And I honestly turned this on way later down the chain when I barely noticed a difference then either, but it's in there now, so I'm keeping it there. Each individual harmor has the ramping turned down and the smooth mod turned off, so that everything just happens as fast as it's supposed to. On B side, I have the detune ratio turned up to 2. All of them I think are like this, which puts it in square mode in a different way than just putting it in square mode would. And this particular way though is where I could crossfade a little bit of the saw in there, so that we get a teensy little bit of bite, especially after all the compression and distortion. Yeah, so that's this dude. And then I put this EQ before the distortion, but like usually I do the distortion first, and then I put the EQ in there to change particular harmonics so that they just behave the way I want them to in the distortion. I did also distort it in the Harmor, so that's part of it, also part of that. Lots of distortion, always distort everything. So that's one of those guys. And then what happened was I cloned them to be a whole other one, and I came in here and I just moved the pitch ratio up or down. In this case, I moved it down, and when you want to do that, what you have to do is, because the number 1 is the lowest ratio you can can't go below it. So I have to go to number 2, but then we'll divide it by 2, so that's still just 1. And then now I can just go down some, and it'll actually go down. It'll go below. This is how you get the pitch to go down. Yeah. And then together. So you can hear that slight high frequency reasing going on. That's not from one of these guys individually. See, because this one by itself, and this one by itself have fairly regular and solid high frequency profiles, but then we have them both together. We're getting phase cancellation that's post the distortion that's happening in these guys. I grabbed this guy because I thought we were still in here, but then EQ them together, same way, and then distort them again. And then we get 2 of these guys, and we add them together. And this is where stuff gets funky. Same like last time I came in here and I moved up the pitch a little bit. Every time I did this, I also changed the user profiles just a little bit. They're all pretty low, so there's not a lot of change that can happen, but it's teensy bit. The filter I'm using, by the way, actually this is kind of important. I should have talked about this already, but the filter I'm using is a custom shape, but it's basically a bandpass filter. It's not that different from what's supposed to be just a bandpass filter. But actually, here's a really big point about why I'm using Harmor at all for this purpose. I knew that what I was going to do was going to involve like your basic reasing and bandpassing business, which meant a lot of like fast and like bandpass specifically based frequency movement. And in regular EQs, like when I'm doing this guy, for example, which is muted. Actually, no, let's put it after this guy. Yeah. So now a regular filter does what this does according to something called minimum phase. There's other stuff called linear phase. That's not what Harmor does, but what happens here is that a regular filter causes what it does to happen at all by creating phase cancellation in the frequency spectrum. It's a bunch of badass stuff, but what that means though is that like when you're moving the stuff, you're moving the phase, which introduces a little bit of FM, and any kind of solid profile you had at all is more or less going to go away. And that's not bad. Like this is the sound that we're used to hearing, and it sounds pretty nice, like the specific effect. But when we're stacking a whole bunch of that together, it can add up to be a real problem real fast. And like a lot of the previous sort of resampling stuff that I did had ran into this issue a lot, and it required a lot of work to kind of make work well. But the beautiful thing about Harmor is that because it's additive and that like there isn't really a filter or it isn't really audio at all, the filtering isn't occurring by changing anything's phase at all. It's occurring by just turning individual harmonics on and off. And that means that no matter how fast or hard I move the filter, it is perfectly linear phase in real time. And with basically no CPU expense, which is not true for other post effect linear phase solutions. So that's why I used Harmor, because that meant that like I could get away with like my first level of filtering to be essentially free, and that made this work, I think, a little bit better. Yeah. So then this guy is a copy of that whole mess that we did the last time, and did the same pitch change and the same minor changes and other stuff, and then whatever. And then I added the filter. So this is a bandpass filter and two notches. A little bit of like slightly down the bandwidth on the bandpass filter, but still on the middle selection option of how steep it is, order 2, which is to say it's not very steep and it's bleeding pretty hard on all the sides, which is great for compressing it later because you still get the filter but you keep all the gear's presence. That's why I like that stuff. Now I did a whole bunch of work with all this automation here, and what's going on basically that I made just XY controls in here, and I just made a pattern that's the main filter, and then these guys are the ancillary automation, which is the second bandpass filter, and then the two thingies. And they have to be their own whole separate things. Like I couldn't just use the other stuff in here because they need to be separate articulators and like separate complete like inputs of automation, and not just different flavor of the original input. And the reason why I did it like this at all, I didn't just automate this and then link the controller to things later, is that this way I could just clone everything down here, activate the relevant controls, and just link them up there, and then they're done. They're going to move. They're together. And because initially what I was doing was that I would automate these guys, and then when I made the next one, I would manually come in here, link the controller, and then link it into the automation clip in there. And that would have been fine, except that I'm going to clone the thing, and I'm going to keep cloning the thing. And I didn't want to have to do that every time I cloned it, because even if I clone this guy, the parameters aren't going to be activated in the clone. So that means I have to redo them I have to reactivate them every time. It would also mean I have to relink them to automation clips, and so it's better just to link these to automation clips and then link the outputs to the parameters, so that you can just clone whatever you want and have everything already pre-linked. That's what's up with that. So this is one chain of these with now the distortions coming out of here is supposed to be the unison, and that's becoming the filter here. And this is actually something that I've never done before, is that because I've done layers like this a little bit in the past, but I've never done like, because at this point where I'm doing like this kind of filtering, it's usually like the top end of things. It's usually the end of the chain that I'm going to be doing, or if I'm going to do anything else, it'll be linear from then on. But I am doing this exact same thing, like the same exact filtering twice, and it is identical. And the differences in the two versions of it are created entirely by the differences in the original pitch, so that like we are creating the exact same sound, only like if we were doing it in audio, it would be a different pitch, slightly different than if we were doing a different pitch, because part of doing a different pitch would also mean, like, if I had recorded this in audio, like this specific chain, which is what we're hearing right now, if I'd recorded that audio, like the specific location of the filters, if I turn the pitch up, essentially like it moves where the filters are, so that the unison wouldn't just be in pitch, but it would also be in like filter position, which can sometimes be cool, like it sometimes be neat. But you can get this kind of like sampled / wavetable effect, where if you change the pitch, too much of the characteristic changes with the pitch. And if you do it this way, the characteristics are all the same no matter what pitch you're doing, because that's what you're telling them to be, unless you tell them to be somewhere else. So yeah, I clone this whole thing and do the entire process for everything that comes in here. I go all the way down and change the pitches a little bit, or change it back. Oh yeah, that's right, because this is the original. The very first one, and all the stacks are the same. And I changed the pitches. Was that the one that I picked last time? Might have been. But and then I also changed the unisons and all that stuff. And then they all come out together. So this patcher that's happening, this EQ is before what's going on here. This whole patcher, and get rid of this other guy, is actually a fun ass trick that I learned from a guy in the Reddit EDM production, the EDM production subreddit IRC chat. And what this shit is that I'm distorting it, but it's pretty just basic distortion. But I'm using the stereo shaper to phase cancel it against an instance of the dry signal, which I'm using as another wave shaper, which is to mix all the way off, just to ensure there's no phase shenanigans. I actually think there would be if I just linked the straight up dry signal, but I didn't want to take chances or do research at all, which is to say to try. Quantum laziness in a full effect. What's going on here, though, is that the distorted channel and the dry channel are phase canceled against each other, which is to say that this is normal, or this is flipped phase, this is normal phase. And what that gets us, after you do that, which we should be able to hear, because I turned it off. So, like, here is the distorted signal. Cool down. Here is the dry signal. Also cool down. Now, what we're doing here is that the phase canceling gets us this. Actually, probably shouldn't use the CQ because it does a lot of stuff. It gets us this sound. Yep. So phase canceling the dry against the wet. Yes. Yep, and this gets us right, because I'm compressing it again. Should probably not have the compressor on. Am I running this through? Should I need to run it through? Nope, this is going all the way out. Cool. Now, if we do this, the next part, right, is that this should be essentially only the distortion, and then this is the dry signal, which then when we play together, the dry signal and the flipped phase distorted signal. Yes, that's why this one's down. So we phase this against the dry signal again, and then when we do that, we get essentially the added together original distorted signal. Now you might be wondering, why the hell did we do any of that? What was the value of separating the distortion like that? Well, It's because we separated the distortion. I just ruined my own punchline, which is the whole idea is that like we are separating what part of the signal is the different distorted part from the original dry signal. So we have the original dry signal and we have the distorted signal, and what is different about it becomes its own entire separate signal. So when you add it to the dry signal, it becomes the distorted signal. And we have the added benefit of being able to separately process what is only the distortion and what is only the dry signal. This was a pretty light example because the distortion I'm using is its own light. And everything I'm doing before this is also distorted, but I've actually done this in previous databases. I wanted to really take advantage of Patcher's patchability here, which its whole thing is that you can do things like this where we are separating. Essentially, I'm creating a distortion module that separates the distortion from the dry signal so we can separately process them. And I made it its own patcher. So then I could just easily clone, and I could have this whole thing down here like that, as opposed to taking like 100 things in here. But yeah, this is a pretty neat trick. And this it doesn't always work. And like, I honestly feel like I get this wrong a lot. Like I mess up the way the phases are supposed to work. In fact, I'm not 100% sure that I even did it right this time. But what's supposed to happen here is that when you get only the distortion and then you add it to the dry signal, you should get the total full original distorted signal. And then you can solve all kinds of problems. Because when you distort stuff, you run into like muddy signals or whatever, and like it's just frequencies you don't want to have. But you do want to have most of that area in the original version. Like, you wanted to have that area in there. You don't want to just kill it because it sounds bad in distortion. So now you can just take out the stuff that sounds bad in distortion and layer it in there with their dry signal. You have such incredible control over it that I'm a bit surprised about myself that I haven't actually like just done this all the time. So that EQ, that was like I high pass the hell out of the distortion. And then I have like a really narrow canyon of like a big hole essentially where the distortion's fitting into to get us. Yep. If I weren't already so far down the chain, this would have had the additional benefit of being able to do things like keep distortion out of the low end entirely, because your sub would be completely solid. But I'm doing it anyway because after I clone these two and do the whole pitch shenanigans again on all these guys, I high pass it all so that I could basically just have the sub come in there clean. And the sub is what it is actually is one of the original harmers that just came into local EQ and just turned all the way down, so that we're still getting the same filter motion out of it, but now just in the low end and like steady. I also turned on harmonic protection a bit, which leaves the lower harmonics kind of lit up at a minimum amount that I set up, which is up here. So like this is one of the super cool values of the whole linear phase aspect of using filters inside Harmor, just because of the nature of it is that I can just toss in this sub at the bottom, and it more or less will fit perfectly because it is what the original content is doing, and just without all that extra processing. And most of the processing you do to like base frequencies are just manifest in the stuff that appears in the higher frequencies. Anyway, so it's not as if we're missing a lot in terms of how the low end is moving after all the processing we did up there. However, we would be missing a lot if we didn't have the low end at all doing what those original Harmors were doing. And also remember, in the harmonic use of pitch window, we made sure that the lower end of the harmonic spectrum did not have a lot of the phase cancellation going on. So that sub in there is like strong. It is up. It is on there. Except for when we change the phase up here of the voices, because that does tend to attenuate the low end a little bit. But it's not going to wreck it. It'll just change its starting phase, which is not that big a deal. For what we're doing here. And like if we did care, if it did become like a problem, which can you even conceive of what kind of that problem would even be? And like if you don't even notice it being a thing, then it's not a problem. It's a pretty great rule of thumb. Yeah. So this FLP will be available for download in the description of this video. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And also, if you're curious about lessons are back. There's a link in the description of the video about that too. And as usual, have a nice day. Yay.